used to think love alone could keep a family together. That if you gave enough, forgave enough, and stayed quiet enough, the people you loved would always see your heart. But life doesn't always reward quiet hearts. At first, after my son's marriage, everything seemed fine. The house was full of laughter again. I would hear my daughter-in-law humming in the kitchen, and I'd smile from the other room. She was young, beautiful, and full of energy. Everything my son had fallen in love with. I wanted her to feel welcome, to feel like she belonged. And for a while, she did. Every morning, I made breakfast for all three of us: soft eggs, toast, and sometimes pancakes if my son had an early shift. She'd often say, "Oh, Mama, you don't have to do that," but I'd smile and reply, "It's no trouble." This is what mothers do. It wasn't about the food. It was about keeping that small warmth alive, that sense of home. But slowly, little things began to change. She started cooking her own meals, saying she wanted to try new recipes. Then she began rearranging the kitchen, moving the sugar jar, the spice rack, the old kettle I'd used for years. One day, I reached for the tea leaves and couldn't find them anywhere. "Oh," she said, "I put them in the other cupboard. It looks better that way." Her tone was polite, but it made me pause. It wasn't the change itself, it was the feeling that my ways no longer belonged here. I told myself not to think too much of it. Every woman wants her home to feel like her own. So I stepped back, quietly. I let her arrange the shelves, choose the curtains, pick the new cushions for the sofa. I even smiled when she replaced my old family photo with a wedding portrait of her and my son. I told myself, this is their home now. You are just part of it. But slowly, that part started shrinking. Evening tea, once shared together at the table, became something they had alone in their room. I'd hear faint laughter behind the closed door, whispers, giggles, the sound of a happy couple, and I'd sit in the living room, pretending to read. Sometimes, my son would come out, see me sitting there, and smile faintly. "You okay, Ma?" he'd ask. I'd nod. "Yes, my boy, I'm fine." And he'd go back inside, closing the door softly behind him. I began to realize that fine was a word mothers often use when their hearts are breaking quietly. A few weeks later, a small misunderstanding planted the first seed of hurt. It was a Sunday. My daughter-in-law had invited some of her friends over for lunch. I'd been up early, cooking rice and lentils, like I always did. When I set the table, she looked at me and said gently, "Oh, I was actually planning something different. I wanted to make pasta today." I froze for a second. "Oh, I didn't know," I said. She smiled, not unkindly, and began clearing the dishes I'd just placed. "It's okay, Mama," she said. "I'll take care of it." It was such a small moment, but as I stood there watching her move the plates, something inside me quietly shifted. For the first time, I felt unneeded. After that day, I started to keep more to myself. I stayed longer in my room, knitting, or watering the plants on the balcony. I still smiled when they came home together, but my smiles began to feel like curtains, soft fabric hiding what I didn't want them to see. My son didn't notice the change, or maybe he didn't want to. He was busy, tired, chasing work and life and love. When we did talk, it was brief, like two people passing on a windy street. "Ma, did you eat?" "Yes." "Okay, good night." And that was that. One night, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. I hadn't meant to listen, but my room was close enough to hear the tones, if not every word. "She means well," my son said softly. "I know," his wife replied, "but I just feel I can't be myself when she's always here." There was silence for a moment. Then my son sighed. "She's just used to doing everything. It's how she shows love." "I understand," she said, "but this isn't her house anymore. It's ours." Those words, they didn't come from anger, but they still felt like a door quietly closing. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the small family photo on my table, me holding my son when he was a little boy, smiling into the camera, his arms wrapped around my neck. I whispered to that picture, "When did I stop being your home?" From that night, something in me began to fade. I stopped offering advice. I stopped waiting up for him to eat. I told myself I was giving them space, but really, I was learning how to disappear slowly. A few months passed like that, quiet, lonely, but bearable. Then came the evening that broke what little balance remained. It was raining outside, heavy and cold. The power had gone out, and I sat by the window, watching the raindrops slide down the glass. I heard them arguing in the other room, voices rising and falling, muffled by walls but sharp enough to sting. I didn't want to hear, but I couldn't block it out. "She told me I don't cook well." My daughter-in-law's voice trembled. I didn't mean it like that, my son replied. You always take her side. Always, she shouted. I can't live like this anymore. There was a pause, then the sound of something breaking. A plate, maybe. I sat frozen, tears forming in my eyes. I hadn't said anything cruel. I had only mentioned, gently, that the curry needed more salt. That one line had turned into a storm. The next morning, she barely looked at me. And my son, he looked tired, caught between love and duty, silence and guilt. I wished I could tell him, you don't have to choose. But deep down, I feared he already had. After that rainy night, the house changed. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was the kind of change you feel before you see. The laughter was softer, the mornings quieter. Even the air seemed heavier, like it carried words that had been spoken, but couldn't be taken back. My daughter-in-law stopped eating breakfast with me. She started leaving earlier for work, sometimes skipping dinner altogether. When she passed by me in the hallway, she'd smile politely, but never stop to talk. And my son, he seemed to walk on eggshells, afraid that any word might tip the balance between us. I kept telling myself, give it time, things will heal. But time, I've learned, doesn't always heal. Sometimes it just teaches you how to live with a quieter kind of pain. One Sunday afternoon, I decided to make peace. I cooked my son's favorite dish, lentil stew with rice and a little pickle on the side. The smell filled the house, warm and comforting, just like it used to. When they came home, I greeted them with a smile. Dinner's ready, I said softly. My daughter-in-law looked at the table, then at me. Oh, we already ate, she said. We stopped by a restaurant. My smile froze. Oh, that's all right, I whispered. I'll put this away. She went to her room, and my son followed her. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the steaming pot, feeling the weight of all those unsaid things. For the first time, I didn't eat either. I just covered the food, sat down, and let the house go still. That night, I cried quietly, not from anger, but from an ache I couldn't name. A mother's love doesn't disappear, but it begins to wonder, where do I belong now? A few days later, my son came to me in the living room. He looked tired, older than his years. Ma, he began carefully. Can we talk? I nodded. Of course, my boy. He hesitated. His eyes darted toward the closed bedroom door, then back to me. It's about the house, he said finally. My chest tightened. The house. He swallowed hard. She's been feeling uncomfortable. She says she needs her own space. A fresh start. I felt my breath slow. A fresh start, I repeated. He nodded, looking at the floor. We were thinking, maybe you could stay with Aunt Clara for a while. The world went quiet for a moment. All I could hear was the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. I wanted to say something, anything, but no words came out. Finally, I managed a small, trembling voice. Do you want me to leave, too? He looked up, guilt heavy in his eyes. No, Ma, it's not like that. It's just temporary, until things settle. Temporary, I repeated again, like the way the rain is temporary, or the way love is. He looked away. Please, Ma, don't make this harder. That line, it broke something in me. I realized then that I wasn't part of the we anymore. The we he spoke of now had room for two, and I was standing outside of it. I didn't argue. I didn't cry in front of him. I just nodded. Of course, my boy, I whispered, if that's what makes you happy. That night, I packed my things. Not much. A few saris, some photographs, my prayer beads, and the old silver box my husband had given me years ago. Every item I placed in that small suitcase felt like a goodbye to a memory. When I reached for my son's childhood photo from the shelf, I paused. The smile on that little boy's face, pure, innocent, full of love, felt like a distant dream. I held it close to my chest and whispered, you promised me once you'd never leave me behind. The next morning, I was ready before anyone woke up. I didn't want a scene, didn't want tears. I wanted to leave quietly, the way I had lived softly, without disturbing anyone. But my son woke up early, as if he knew. He came to the living room and saw my suitcase by the door. Ma, he said, his voice breaking. You don't have to go so soon. I smiled faintly. You said she needs space, my child. Let her have it. He took a step closer. I didn't mean for it to be like this. I touched his face gently. I know, that's what hurts the most. For a long moment, we stood there in silence, two people connected by love, separated by circumstance. Then I picked up my bag and walked to the door. Before leaving, I turned once more and looked at the home I had built, the walls that had held my laughter, my tears, my dreams. It The first few days at my sister Clara's house felt strange. I wasn't used to waking up in a room that didn't smell like my home, the faint scent of sandalwood soap, or the soft hum of the ceiling fan that always clicked every few turns. Here, everything was still, unfamiliar. Even the silence sounded different. Clara was kind. She always had been. She cooked with love, spoke gently, and never once asked me what had happened. But I could feel her eyes on me sometimes, full of questions she didn't want to ask, and I was grateful for her silence, because the truth when spoken hurts more than when it's quietly carried. I tried to keep busy. I helped in the kitchen, watered her plants, folded laundry. But every time I saw a mother and son walking together outside, my chest ached. I would catch myself whispering, "He used to walk beside me like that." Then I'd smile through the ache and continue cutting vegetables as if nothing had happened. Clara had two daughters, sweet, lively girls who filled the house with laughter. They often came to me with stories from school, asking for advice or for me to braid their hair. Those little moments kept me grounded. They reminded me that love could still find its way through small acts, a touch, a story, a shared meal. One evening, as I sat alone on the porch, Clara joined me with 2 cups of tea. She placed one beside me and said softly, "You haven't talked about it yet." I smiled faintly. Some stories are easier when they stay untold. She nodded slowly. "You still love him, don't you?" My eyes welled up, and I looked away. A mother never stops. Even when her heart is heavy, the days turned into weeks. My son didn't call. At first, I waited by the phone, checking every sound, hoping it was him. Then, after a while, I stopped waiting. Not because I gave up, but because I realized waiting was its own kind of pain. Instead, I began writing. Every morning, after my prayers, I'd take out an old notebook and write small letters to him. I never sent them. They weren't meant to be. They were more like conversations with my heart. I'd write about how I missed his voice, how I remembered the day he was born, how proud I was when he first called me Ma. Sometimes I cried while writing, sometimes I smiled, but every word I wrote helped me breathe again. Clara noticed one day. She peeked into the notebook and said, "You should send him one of these." I shook my head gently. "No, he knows my heart. He just needs time to remember it." A month later, I started going to the local temple again. There, I met other elderly women, some widows, some living alone like me. We'd sit together after prayers, talking softly about our children, our pasts, our quiet hopes. I realized then, I wasn't the only one carrying a story like mine. So many mothers had been forgotten, not out of cruelty, but out of the busyness of life. And yet, none of them spoke with bitterness. There was pain, yes, but also grace. We had learned that love doesn't disappear when it's not returned. It simply changes form. One afternoon, after weeks of peace, my sister called me from the porch. "There's someone here to see you," she said. My heart jumped, though I didn't dare hope. When I stepped out, I saw him, my son, standing there, looking older, thinner, and unsure. For a moment, I couldn't move. He took a hesitant step forward. "Ma," he said softly. That one word, "Ma," carried every apology he couldn't yet say. I felt tears in my eyes, but I didn't rush to him. I waited. He walked closer. "I came as soon as I could," he said, his voice trembling. I smiled faintly. "You came when your heart was ready." He lowered his head. "I should have come sooner." I reached out and touched his hand. "We can't change the time that's passed, my boy, but we can start again." He broke down then, right there on the porch, in front of Clara's roses. He cried like the little boy I once held after every scraped knee. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Ma," he sobbed. I pulled him into my arms. "I know, sometimes love takes the wrong road, but it always finds its way home." When we finally sat down, he told me everything. How his wife had been struggling with her own insecurities, how he had tried to keep peace but failed both of us. I listened quietly, not to judge, but to understand, because that's what mothers do. We listen even when our hearts are aching. He said softly, "She's sorry, too. She wants to make things right." I nodded, "Then let her. Forgiveness doesn't erase pain, but it makes room for healing." He stayed for a few hours that day. We talked about simple things, his work, his health, little stories from his childhood. And when he left, he hugged me tightly. "Can I come again soon?" he asked. I smiled through tears. "You'll always have a home in my heart, my son. That's one door that never closes." After he left, Clara sat beside me. She didn't say anything. She just placed her hand on mine and we watched the evening light settle softly over the garden. The wind carried the scent of jasmine, and for the first time in months, my heart felt light. Days passed. My son began visiting more often, sometimes alone, sometimes with his wife. The first time she came, she stood at the door awkwardly, holding a box of sweets. I smiled and invited her in. She hesitated, then whispered, "I'm sorry for everything." I nodded slowly. "You're young, marriage is hard, family is harder, but you're learning, that's what matters." Her eyes filled with tears, and in that small, quiet moment, something softened between us. Over time, I realized that forgiveness doesn't need big gestures or words. It lives in small acts: a shared meal, a kind look, a cup of tea poured without hesitation. Love, once broken, can be rebuilt, not the same, but strong, in a different way. As weeks turned into months, I visited them sometimes. The house felt different now. There was laughter again, gentle, real, not forced. My daughter-in-law began including me in small things: family dinners, festivals, even shopping trips. She'd say, "Ma, what do you think of this?" And though it was just a question about a dress or a dish, to me, it felt like an invitation back into their lives. One evening, my son walked me home after dinner. The moonlight made the streets glow softly. He said, "I've been thinking about what you told me, that love doesn't disappear, it just changes form." I looked at him, smiling. It does, and sometimes, it comes back even stronger. He took my hand in his, just like he did when he was little, and for the first time in a long while, I felt complete again. It's strange how time softens even the deepest wounds. A year has passed since that painful day, the day my daughter-in-law asked me to leave, and my son stood in silence. If someone had told me back then that I would one day smile again, I wouldn't have believed it. But life, it seems, has a quiet way of healing us, not all at once, but slowly, gently. Sometimes, when I sit by my window with a cup of tea, I watch the sunlight dance on the leaves outside. The world looks peaceful again. The same trees that once looked lonely now seem full of life. It's as if they remind me, no season lasts forever. Even the coldest winter gives way to spring. My relationship with my son has changed, yes, but it has also grown deeper. We don't talk about the past much. We don't need to. The silence between us now is not heavy anymore. It's warm, like the quiet between two hearts that finally understand each other. Sometimes he calls me just to ask, "Ma, did you eat?" And even though it's a simple question, I can hear the care behind it. Each call, each visit, feels like a small step toward healing, a bridge being rebuilt one plank at a time. My daughter-in-law visits too. She helps me in the kitchen, sometimes bringing new recipes she's learned. We laugh together now. She often says, "I wish I had understood you earlier." And I tell her, it takes time to understand people. Even love needs time to grow. She smiles shyly, and I see in her eyes a genuine effort to make things right. And that's enough for me. The notebook where I once wrote unsent letters to my son still lies in my drawer. I haven't written in it for months, not because I stopped feeling, but because I finally said everything I needed to, not on paper, but in life. Still, sometimes I open it and read those words. They remind me of how far I've come from heartbreak to peace. One Sunday afternoon, as we all sat together at my dining table, my son, his wife Clara, and her daughters, I looked around and realized something beautiful. The same table that once felt empty was now full of laughter again. Different faces, perhaps, but the same warmth I'd once dreamed of. I didn't need perfection anymore. All I needed was presence, the simple joy of being together. That evening, after everyone left, I stepped outside and looked at the sky. The sunset was soft and golden, stretching across the horizon like a quiet blessing. I whispered to myself, "I'm proud of you." Not to my son, but to the woman I had become, the woman who learned to love without bitterness, who forgave without forgetting, and who found strength in her own heart. You see, I used to think love was about holding on tightly, but now, I know sometimes, it's about letting go just enough for others to find their way back. Love is patient. Love waits, even in silence, and when it returns, it carries the scent of forgiveness, not regret. As I closed my eyes that night, I felt a deep peace, the kind that doesn't come from perfect endings, but from understanding. My story wasn't about losing my son, it was about finding myself, my voice, my calm, my courage to stand alone without feeling lonely. If you are listening to this, maybe your heart has known a similar ache. Maybe you, too, have been forgotten, misunderstood, or left behind. But remember this, your love still matters. Your kindness still echoes.